The hybrid sitting of the House will now resume. Private notice question on conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. Baroness Cox.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
I call the Minister, Baroness Sugg.
My Lords, as a party to the Convention on the Crime of Genocide, the UK is fully committed to the prevention and punishment of genocide as appropriate under the Convention. We remain deeply concerned about the impact of the conflict on civilians in the Nagorno-Karabakh region and continue to call for urgent de-escalation and a return to negotiations.
Baroness Cox.
My Lords, I thank the noble lady the Minister. For weeks, Turkey and Azerbaijan were preparing to commit genocide, and Azerbaijan continues to target civilian settlements, including a maternity hospital, with heavy weapons, cluster bombs and drones. And according to Genocide Watch's 10 stages of the genocidal process, Azerbaijan has already reached stage 9, extermination, and stage 10, denial. May I ask the noble lady the Minister if Her Majesty's Government will fulfil its duty to protect, making urgent representations to the UN Security Council to impose an embargo on sales of arms to Azerbaijan, and demanding that Azerbaijan immediately stops all offensive attacks.
My Lords, we remain deeply concerned around the conflict, and we also regret the lack of progress towards a peaceful settlement and, of course, condemn any targeting of civilians. There is an OSCE arms embargo in place related to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and we believe that that's sufficient to ensure that the international community is not inadvertently party to attacks on civilians from either side. We will continue to make urgent representation to stop all offensive attacks, both directly to the parties and through the OSCE and the UN Security Council.
I call Lord Clerk of Windermere.
My Lords, this is one of the frozen conflicts in the edge of Europe. The difficulty is it could grow out of control as a number of other powers, such as Russia, Turkey, Iran, and the West, are interested in the South Caucasus. Will the government show a little more activity in this respect? And will it use its influence to ensure that the troublesome individuals and players in the field are reined in somewhat?
My Lords, I agree with the noble lord that this is a deeply complex and historic conflict, and also that it does present a risk to regional stability, and that is absolutely what we are trying to avoid, any instability within the region. I would say, though, that the UK is taking an active role. We are not co-chairs of the Minsk Group, but we fully support them. We are also working with our partners internationally, both bilaterally and through multilaterals. We have regular contact with the foreign ministers of both countries. And as I say, we continue to urge the de-escalation to this conflict. We know that there will not be a military solution, and we do need to see both parties return to the negotiation table, and the UK will continue to press for that.
I call Lord Addington.
My Lords, would the Minister agree that we have to have a look at this in the round, bearing in mind that there is a long history of distrust and a search for revenge in both of these parties involved? And Genocide Watch, for instance, give Armenia the ratings, as Baroness Cox referred to, of 8 and 10, so they are not without some form of blame here or some concern. Could the Minsk Group be kicked into life, and could the government make sure that the US, hopefully later on in this week or next week, takes this problem seriously and makes sure there is some activity there? Because at the least we need observation on the ground about what's going on, because knowing that if you commit crimes you pay a price might be some way of reining people in.
I thank the noble lord for his question, and I agree that it's we must see both sides come to the table. Both sides need to compromise. We do fully support the Minsk Group, who have been working hard to make progress. We've seen meetings in Moscow, in Paris, and in Washington. But sadly, despite these efforts, there has not been a sustained ceasefire. But significant efforts will, of course, continue, and we will continue to support the co-chairs in their work to bring about a sustainable peace.
I call Lord Pickles.
My Lords, the present Turkish government is very sensitive to allegations of Armenian genocide 100 years ago. Doesn't this underline the need for Turkey, a valued member of NATO, to be unambiguous in its dealings with the current conflict, not only ensuring that arms are not supplied to those involved in the murder of women and children, but also showing in the clearest possible way that they are urging the parties to seek peace? And what discussions has my noble friend had with the Turkish government?
My Lords, we do agree with my noble friend that Turkey needs to be part of the solution. The Prime Minister discussed the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh with President Erdogan on the 28th of September. We have had ongoing conversations with them. Most recently, the Foreign Secretary spoke to their Foreign Minister. Turkey is a key NATO ally and sits on the front line of some of the most difficult and serious challenges we face. But we must encourage, as indeed we encourage all external actors, to not escalate the situation and actually become involved in bringing about a peaceful solution.
I call Lord Alton of Liverpool.
My Lords, the noble Baroness has reminded us that we are signatories to the 1948 Convention on the Crime of Genocide, which places a duty on all its signatories to prevent, to protect and then to punish. My Lords, my noble friend Lady Cox has reminded us that a maternity hospital has been bombed in Nagorno-Karabakh by Azeri forces. This is a war crime, my Lords. What action are we taking to ensure that those responsible for war crimes are held to account? Important though it is to bring people back around the table, it must be a central objective, surely, of Her Majesty's government that those who are responsible for war crimes and genocide are appropriately held to account.
My Lords, the UK is fully committed to the principle that there must be no impunity for the most serious international crimes, and we continue to voice our support for this principle and, of course, continue to support the work of the International Criminal Court and the international tribunals to tackle impunity for these crimes. All allegations of war crimes or other atrocities must be investigated and prosecuted and, if appropriate, punished. And we completely condemn any attack on civilians.
I call the Lord Bishop of St Albans.
Would the Minister comment on whether Her Majesty's government believes that the criteria used to recognise Kosovo and the principle of internal self-determination, which protects minority rights, equally applies to the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, and whether, like Kosovo, recognition may help prevent the possible ethnic cleansing of Armenians that has historically characterised territorial border conflicts in that part of the Caucasus?
My Lords, we support the Minsk principles, which do ensure that there is an interim status for Nagorno-Karabakh, and it provides guarantees for security and self-governance. But ultimately, future determination of the final legal status of Nagorno-Karabakh will need to be done through a legally binding expression of will.
I call Lord Collins of Highbury.
My Lords, despite my initial concerns about the role of the US in the Minsk process, I'm pleased about what has been attempted over recent weeks, and certainly the brokering of the ceasefires, which sadly, of course, as the noble lady mentioned, have thus so far failed. But the international community has a responsibility to promote and facilitate peace. And as the noble Lord Pickle said, we cannot ignore the role which outside actors are playing. So can the noble lady tell us a bit more about what we are doing within NATO diplomatically to ensure that our concerns with the actions of Turkey are properly and adequately conveyed?
My Lords, I agree with the noble Lord that we have a responsibility to promote and facilitate peace, and that is what we're trying to do in this conflict. I also agree with the noble Lord that the US are playing an important role. I mentioned the talks which are having in Washington and some strong statements from both the heads of state and also the co-chairs at the Minsk group. On NATO, NATO doesn't have a direct role in the conflict, but the Secretary General has expressed concern over the escalation of hostilities, and NATO are calling for all sides to immediately cease fighting and find a way towards a peaceful resolution, and we strongly support that stance.
I call Lord Taylor of Goss Moor.
The Minister has just said that NATO does not have a role in the conflict, and that's certainly true as things stand. But clearly the position in the Caucasus could easily escalate, particularly given Turkey's involvement. Can the Minister be a little more forthcoming about the activity that the government is undertaking, in particular to work to try to change Turkey's position on this and to get Turkey to be involved in seeking peace?
My Lords, I mentioned that we are having regular conversations with Turkey at all levels in order to ensure that they are, in order to assist them in playing a constructive role to bringing about an end to this conflict. We are aware, of course, of their strong partnerships and military relations in the region, but it's of course important that they play their role in bringing both sides to the table and encouraging negotiation.
I call Baroness Eaton.
My Lords, the escalation of conflict is exacerbated by Azerbaijan's constant use of hostile propaganda, which is not conducive to effective peace negotiations. Will the Minister support Genocide Watch's call for world leaders to condemn such hate speech and promote an end to hostilities and the implementation of a new ceasefire?
My Lords, we fully support a new ceasefire, and that is indeed what we're calling for. As I said, we regret that the conversations around ceasefire have not brought about a sustained ceasefire, but we continue to encourage both parties to start a ceasefire. On hate speech, the UK, of course, works to combat intolerance and hate globally and to indeed promote tolerance and respect, and I join my noble friend in the condemnation of hate speech.
I call Lord Green of Deddington.
My Lords, the noble Baroness mentioned civilians. Is the Minister aware of reports of the use of phosphorus by Azerbaijan in attacking woodlands in Karabakh? This is extremely dangerous for civilians, as it's not only toxic, but it would also ignite the very woodlands to which they've been forced to flee by Azerbaijan's shelling of towns. Could the noble Baroness ascertain whether these reports are true, and if true, what actions might the government take?
My Lords, we have seen a number of reports highlighting some terrible incidences affecting civilians. We will continue to monitor that carefully. We have actually announced some new UK aid support over the weekend, which is directly targeted to help thousands of people who have been affected by the conflict, and that's to support urgent medical supplies, food and safer shelters, and that's a £1 million aid package in response to an appeal through the International Committee of the Red Cross.
I call Baroness Gowdy.
My Lords, I welcome the government's assistance for aid, but at the same time I'd also like to ask, almost a month ago, Canada halted arms sales to Azerbaijan's backer and ally Turkey in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Will the UK do likewise?
My Lords, we continue to monitor developments in the region closely, and we consider all of our export applications thoroughly against a strict risk assessment framework and keep all licences under careful review. The UK complies with the OSCE arms embargo relating to the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which is considered as part of our export licensing process.
I call Lord McColl of Dulwich.
You've spoken to me. Thanks so much.
My Lords,
I wondered why you were asking me to unmute, because we've gone through the procedure before.
My Lords, reliable reports suggest that Azerbaijan, supported by Turkey, continue to deploy illegal weapons against civilian settlements in breach of international humanitarian law and Geneva Conventions. Will Her Majesty's government produce an urgent plan of protection, economic support and development from Nagorno-Karabakh?
My Lords, we will, of course, continue to do our utmost to end violations of international human rights law and, where appropriate, international humanitarian law. And we are working to prevent the escalation of conflict and to help alleviate the suffering of those who are affected. I mentioned the new aid package, which the UK has contributed to. But we don't believe that there is a military solution. We do think the best thing for the people of the region is for both parties to put aside any preconceived judgments and come to the negotiation table to bring about a peaceful settlement.
I call the final speaker, Baroness de Souza.
My Lords, the UK's obligations are indeed clear and binding to prevent and suppress actions of genocide. Will Her Majesty's government refer the matter to the appropriate judicial authority in the UK or request a competent body of the UN to mandate the International Criminal Court to initiate investigations?
My Lords, we will continue to support the work of the International Criminal Court and international tribunals to tackle